Hi, my today's presentation is going to be how to utilize first few critical hours during ransomware infection. As we know that when ransomware infection happens, we do not know its scale and magnitude and complexity. It may be limited to few servers, or it can propagate to entire application network systems, including the disaster recovery systems. This prohibits and creates a situation of panic wherein we do not know enough. Hence, first few hours are very critical to identify the impact and magnitude and see that if we can be operationally resilient and come back on our feet as soon as possible. So let's get started with the presentation. So what we will be doing in this presentation is that when ransomware infection happens, we will follow the same MITRE model to respond to the ransomware infection. It starts with initial access, wherein we are trying to identify how the malware at the first place came in. It came in through phishing, creation of droppers, or vulnerability exploitation, or there were remote access utilities that were utilized, like RDP compromise by brute force attacks, etc. Then we will look at execution, whether it happened through PowerShell or Cobalt Strike or other utilities were used. Persistence by having some scheduled tasks, registry setting changes, or privilege escalation by looking at whether the privilege has escalated to domain admin by using PowerShell scripts, command line utilities, WMI calls, or really just by doing a brute force attacks or Kerberos roasting, etc. We will see lateral movement about how the infection moves from one part to another. Evasion of DMAC defense, like bypassing EDR using AMSI techniques or disabling security tools and logging. Credential access by using keylogging or mimikatz. Discovery to find sensitive information, specifically SharePoint portals, customer information, and then exfiltrating to do double extortion. And then see that how they're encrypting the data either by uh, scripts that will run when the users log into the Active Directory, or the systems which are connected to get executed, or by doing lateral movements, you're also sending up the scripts to all the workstations and servers and then infecting them by distributing either using Active Directory systems, policies, or by other utilities. So what is step one? When we see that a system is infected with a ransomware, when we come to know about the first system, say for example, we generally find the ransomware node. And the first point is that we have to isolate that system and then read the ransomware nodes. When we read the ransomware node and see the extension, generally we will be able to know which group the ransomware belongs to, whether it's a black cat or it's a logbait, etc. We can identify the encrypted files, we can see ransomware nodes, we can see file extensions, we can see communication details, and then try to guess. And largely, if it is a popular group of ransomware, you will generally be able to correlate it faster. The second thing we can do is that before the system got encrypted, it must be sending the logs to the SIM or to the EDR or to the Active Directory. And the user might also be communicating to the outside world using proxy or some external systems. What we can do is that we can analyze those logs to see if there were unauthorized softwares like Mimikatz, Process Express, PC Hunters, Gamer, etc. in the system, and see if the system was connected to outside IP addresses, have exfiltrated large amount of data, and we can also check for unauthorized RDP usage and tools like Bloodhound and Active Directory Find for Active Directory infiltration. This will give us a reasonably good amount of information to judge which group of ransomware has infected you. And then you can identify those IOCs and then validate and start to block those IOCs in the system. Now, the second step is that we can do malware analysis, which means that we can extract the malware in the isolated systems that we have just done, put it into a sandbox like a cuckoo. We can examine static properties. When we say static properties are packers or strings, there may be hard-coded IPs, there may be DNS fast plugs that might be happening, which means that once the infection happens, the systems try to connect to command and control by using fast plug DNS. So you will see a lot of failed resolution attempts in the DNS log files, and you can find the header details. Then you can also identify the outbound communication from that systems to see if there are prefetch files or a startup files or cookie creation that is happening, registry changes. And then you can also compute the hash value and then search in the threat database to identify if there is an infection which already happens. You can do this by opening up your terminal and putting by MD5 command line to get the SHA-256 hash value. And then you can validate with external threat intel platforms like VirusTotal, or you can also do heavy analysis. Once you do that, you can identify how this is, malware was delivered. It can be through email, it can be through PDF files, or it can be through website or a package software. Then, if you are able to identify, you can do the iOS scanning across the systems to identify if there are other systems which are infected. And then you can also identify If the SIM is showing up similar signs of utility usage of the utilities and tools that you identified, and once you identify it, you can block all the IOCs in the firewalls, intrusion prevention systems, proxies, and the ADR. Now, step three, when we are trying to probe further, and depending on where we stand in the first few hours to identify the infection, we can use certain advanced analysis techniques. This may take few more hours, like extracting the adversaries, which includes trying to identify the malware properties like file, system calls, processes, network connection. We can also search for infected system and see if there are data transfer patterns that you can identify. Typically, when data transfer happens, you will be able to find in proxy because there may be external sites where large amount of data is gone from the infected system, or you may be able to identify from DNS, like if the DNS tunneling is being used, or if there are large HTTP packets that are going out, or utilities like rclone, which might be transferring the data. Then you can do the proxy and DNS analysis to identify suspicious traffics, or if there are connections which are trying to bypass the SSL connections, you can identify from DNS logs about malicious communication and potential data exfiltration by using tunneling. Active Directory is one of the biggest source which can be used to see the logs and identify about infection as well as privilege escalation and then distribution of the malware. So what you can do is that you can identify account status, which means group membership, if there are elevated privileges, new user accounts that are created, privilege group additions, and another suspicious logon event. And how we can do that? You can start with the event ID 4624, which typically tells you about the remote logon event. And then you can correlate it with event ID 4104, which is a PowerShell blocking. You can also look for forced AD replication or forced AD domain sync, because typically when you have multiple ADs, like an Azure Active Directory or a directory services in DC and then DR, when you are using forced replication, if you compromise one of the AD, then the same infection data changes, etc., moves to the other AD also. You can also check for service accounts if they are enabled with interactive logon. You can look for event ID 4688 that actually creates a child process for remote administration services using WinService.exe. It's a WMI service, Windows Management Instrumentation, which can also be called for command execution, including running some privileged commands. You can also check for password dumps. Typically, password files are dumped in temporary file with the SAM, and then there is a name.tm dump tmp. You can also find some suspicious executables in the temp folder. You can see if there are presence of any remote desktop protocols or tools like VNC and TeamViewer. You can also look as task scheduler jobs. Along with that, you can continue to see that if you can identify certain process or anomaly detection, you can look at it into the EDR too, where you will be able to identify certain Kerberos roasting and TLM related attacks. You can also look at event ID 4672, which means that there are some special privileges which were granted to the new logon. You can also look for commands like get connect with specific file names that you can use in PowerShell scripts to exfiltrate some specific files. You can see for group policy changes. You can identify if there is an execution of NTDS util, which is typically used to delete the volume shadow copy. And what are the update security measures? By doing this, if you are able to identify all the indicator of compromise, then you can update into the EDR, and then you can use the EDR to block it. Now, what happens when your data center is compromised? Typically, when your data center and disaster recovery systems are compromised, you are very wary of running them again because you do not know till what the infection is spread. And if after blocking, the infection still exists and some of the systems still are unrecoverable, and those systems which are on might also be getting encrypted over a period of time or a shorter period of time. So you typically end up developing all of this into an isolated recovery environment. And the benefit of isolated recovery environment is that you have an immutable malware detected clean copies of data. You also have a clean room where you have systems built in, and it is offline. And because it is offline, you are in a position to restore the applications by snapshotting technologies or rebuilding the systems and application, and then updating all the security tools, which includes EDR with all the updated IOCs and scanning in. Once you have a clean copy of data, you have systems rebuilt, then you can put the systems online and then do the hyperactive monitoring. So with that, I end my presentation here. Thank you very much. Hope this is helpful. That in first few hours, what are the steps we can do to fast track and to identify the ransomware infections, block it, and then see if within the next 24 hours to 48 hours if we are in a position to run the IRE and invoke that. Thank you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and also press the bell icon to stay notified of all the future released videos. See you in the next one. Thank you.